Get a job or get out, my daughter said 3 weeks after I buried my husband. And the worst part was not her voice, but how calmly she reached for the butter dish right after, like she had just asked me to pass the salt. I was still wearing black. My husband Walter had been gone 22 days. His coat was still hanging by my front door. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand in the guest room Brooke said I could use for as long as I needed. That was the phrase she used when she came to get me after the funeral. For as long as I needed. She said I should not be alone. She said the house would feel too quiet. She said I could stay with her husband Grant, and the kids until I got my footing again. I believed her because grief makes you reach for the nearest familiar hand, even when that hand belongs to someone who has already started pulling away. That night, the roast chicken had gone cold on my plate. The boys were upstairs. Grant kept chewing, but slower now, like he wished he could disappear into the wallpaper. Brooke sat across from me in a cream sweater that cost more than my first car payment. Her phone turned face down beside her wine glass. She did not look angry. Anger would have been easier to forgive. She looked organized. That was what chilled me. Organized. Like she had rehearsed it in the mirror before dinner. Mom, this can't go on, she said, cutting her green beans into neat little pieces. You're 73, not 93. You can still work. Do something. Part-time at least. You can't just sit here and be sad forever. I looked at her and honestly thought I had misheard. I waited for the joke, the apology, the smile that would tell me I had stepped into some awful misunderstanding. None came. The refrigerator hummed. Someone's sprinklers ticked outside in the dark. Grant took a sip of water and kept his eyes on the table. I am not sitting here doing nothing, I said, and my own voice sounded far away, like it belonged to another widow in another kitchen. I just buried my husband. Brooke exhaled through her nose. And I am sorry for that. But life moves on. Bills don't stop. The world doesn't stop. You need a plan, and right now you're acting like this is your house. That was the second blow. Not get a job or get out. This is not your house. I set my fork down so carefully you would have thought it was made of glass. I had helped pay Brooke's college tuition. I had watched both her sons when she went back to work after maternity leave. I had sat in emergency rooms, on bleachers, in school auditoriums, and on tiny plastic chairs at parent-teacher nights, because family was family, and you showed up. And now I was being spoken to like an overstayed guest with wet towels on the bathroom floor. I wanted to say 100 things. I wanted to remind her that grief was not laziness. I wanted to ask how a daughter becomes this polished and cold while her mother's mascara is still tucked beside funeral sympathy cards. But something in me went still instead. Still and sharp. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, and placed it beside my plate. I see, I said. That was all. Brooke blinked, maybe disappointed that I had not broken into tears for her. Maybe she had prepared herself for drama and did not know what to do with dignity. I stood, carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it clean, and listened to the water run over my hands. Behind me, no one stopped me. No one said, Mom, wait. No one said, Brooke, that was cruel. I dried the plate, set it in the rack, and walked to the guest room with the slow, steady steps of a woman who had just learned that losing a husband was not the end of her old life after all. Trusting the wrong child was. I did not slam drawers or throw things into my suitcase. I folded each piece as if neat corners could hold the rest of me together. 1 black cardigan, 2 blouses, my good navy slacks, stockings still in the package from Easter service, my pill organizer, my hairbrush, Walter's watch, which had stopped at 4:12 the morning he died and had not moved since. I set it in the side pocket beside my eyeglasses and the small envelope of condolence cards I had not yet found the strength to read. The guest room smelled faintly of lavender detergent and the cherry lip gloss Brooke used to leave on every bathroom counter when she was a teenager. For 1 weak second, I saw her at 16, all long legs and college brochures, asking me if a red dress looked too grown up for the winter dance. I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my bed after thunderstorms and press her cold feet against my calves. Then I heard her laugh in the kitchen, low and careless, and the memory shut like a door. I zipped the suitcase and looked around the room to make sure I had left nothing behind. There was a framed photo of Brooke's family on the dresser, all of them in matching cream sweaters at a Christmas tree farm, cheeks pink from the cold, smiles bright and polished. I was not in it. I did not know why that stung as much as it did. Maybe because it felt honest. Maybe because I had been edited out long before dinner. When I came back down the hall, Grant was standing by the sink pretending to wipe a clean counter. He glanced up, then toward the front door, then back at the sponge in his hand. "You do not have to leave tonight," he said, but his voice was soft in the way people speak when they want credit for kindness without paying the full price of it. Brooke sat at the table scrolling through her phone as if she were checking weather, not dismantling what was left of her mother. "I think it is best," I said. She did not look up right away. When she finally did, her face had that strained, patient expression people use with someone they have already decided is unreasonable. "Mom, do not make this bigger than it is," she said. "No one is throwing you onto the street. There are motels. There are senior apartments. There are resources. You are acting like you have no options." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the cruelty was so clean. Resources. As if I were a pamphlet problem. As if widowhood came with a hotline and a welcome packet. I slipped my coat on, button by button, fingers steady now. "You are right about one thing," I said. "I do have options." Her eyebrows lifted at that, maybe because she heard something in my tone she had not expected. I took my purse from the chair, the old brown leather one Walter bought me in Chicago on our 30th anniversary after I said it was too expensive, and he said, "Evelyn, some things are worth carrying for a long time." Brooke finally stood. "Do not be dramatic and tell everyone I kicked you out," she said. There it was. Not guilt. Not grief. Reputation. The one thing she still cared enough to chase me with. I turned to face her fully then. She was beautiful in the harsh, polished way magazines call effortless and mothers know is anything but. "Then perhaps," I said, "you should have spoken more kindly." Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Grant stared at the floor. I walked to the door and felt a small handrail of calm settle inside me. Outside, the air was cool and dry. A sprinkler hissed across the lawn next door. Somewhere down the street a garage door rumbled shut. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary night. That was what made it hurt. The world had not changed shape to mark the moment my daughter became a stranger. My old sedan was parked at the curb under a street lamp, still dusty from the drive back from the cemetery 3 Sundays ago. I set the suitcase in the trunk, slid behind the wheel, and rested both hands there without turning the key. Through the front window, I could see Brooke moving around the dining room, straightening chairs, clearing plates, restoring order. By the time I pulled away, she had already begun erasing the evidence that I had been there at all. I drove without the radio on because I could not bear another human voice that night. The dashboard clock glowed 9:47, then 10:03, then 10:19 as I passed strip malls, gas stations, and dark storefronts with neon signs buzzing in half-empty parking lots. I did not have a destination in mind at first. I only knew I was not turning back. My hand stayed at 10 and 2 on the wheel the way Walter taught Brooke when she was 15 and certain she already knew everything. The memory came so sharply that I almost pulled over. Instead, I kept going until I saw a roadside motel with a vacancy sign lit in blue. The kind of place you notice but never imagine entering unless life has shifted under your feet. I parked beneath a flickering light and sat there for a full minute with the engine off, listening to it tick as it cooled. Then I picked up my purse, smoothed my coat, and walked inside like a woman checking in for one ordinary night, and not a woman trying to understand how her own child had made her homeless with a straight face. The clerk was a young man with tired eyes and a paper cup of coffee beside the register. He did not ask questions. Bless him for that. He slid the form toward me, and I wrote my name in careful block letters. Evelyn Carter. Room 114. Ground floor. Ice machine near the vending area. Continental breakfast ended at 9. His voice was flat and practiced, but it felt kinder than anything I had heard all evening. When I opened the room, the first thing that hit me was the smell of lemon cleaner and old air conditioning. The bedspread was a faded burgundy. The lamp beside the bed leaned slightly to the left. There was a watercolor print of a sailboat above the television, and the sink was outside the bathroom, just like motels used to be in the 70s when Walter and I were young and drove south every summer with maps folded in the glove compartment. I set my suitcase on the luggage rack and stood there staring at the room as if it belonged to someone else. Then the silence settled in. No grandchildren thumping overhead. No dishwasher humming. No Brooke moving dishes around in sharp little bursts. Just the air unit rattling and the ice machine groaning through the wall every few minutes. I took off my coat and laid it across the chair. I lined my pill organizer beside the sink. I placed Walter's watch on the nightstand. It still read 4:12. I do not know why I kept carrying a broken watch, as if time might decide to show mercy and restart itself. But grief makes you loyal to strange things. My phone buzzed just as I sat on the edge of the bed. For one foolish instant, I thought it might be Brooke saying she was sorry. It was a text from her instead. Please do not involve the boys in this. They do not need confusion right now. I read it twice. No apology. No where are you? No are you safe? Just instructions. Even then, even after she had watched me leave with one suitcase, she still wanted control of the story. I set the phone face down and took off my earrings. A few minutes later it buzzed again. This time it was Grant. Let us talk tomorrow when everyone is calmer. Everyone. As if we had all misbehaved equally at the dinner table. As if cruelty and endurance were sister offenses. I did not answer either message. I washed my face with motel soap that smelled faintly of powder, changed into my nightgown, and sat on the bed with Walter's wedding ring in my palm. Mine was still on my finger. This had been returned to me in a small velvet pouch from the funeral home, and I had not yet found a place for it that did not feel like betrayal. I closed my hand around it until the metal pressed a half moon into my skin. The truth came to me there, in that shabby little room with its thin curtains and buzzing lamp. Brooke had not said those things because she was grieving badly or speaking carelessly. She had said them because she meant them. That was what finally let the tears come, not loud or dramatic, just steady and hot, sliding down a face I suddenly felt too old to hide. I cried for Walter. I cried for the daughter I had raised and the stranger who had replaced her. I cried because I had been naive enough to think being needed once meant being loved forever. Sometime after midnight, I fell asleep on top of the blanket with the lamp still on. When I woke, gray morning light was pressing through the curtains and my neck ached from the angle. For a second I did not know where I was. Then I saw the sailboat print, the suitcase, the watch stopped at 4:12, and I remembered everything. My phone had 2 missed calls from Brooke and 1 from an unknown number. No voicemail. I showered, dressed in my navy slacks and white blouse, pinned back my hair, and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were swollen, but my hands were steady. That mattered more. I picked up my purse, slipped Walter's watch inside, and headed for the one place Brooke had clearly hoped I would be too shaken to go. The bank. The bank opened at 9, and I was standing outside at 8:45 with a paper cup of motel coffee cooling in my hand and a knot in my chest that had nothing to do with caffeine. The branch sat in the same brick building it had occupied for nearly 30 years, with trimmed hedges, polished glass doors, and the kind of quiet order Walter always trusted. We had opened our first joint account there when Brooke was still in middle school, back when our biggest monthly worry was braces and whether the transmission in the Buick would last through winter. I had not come to the bank in person for months because Walter handled most of it toward the end, insisting it gave him something useful to do while the treatments wore him down. At the time I let him, thinking I was being kind. Standing there that morning, I realized kindness and ignorance can look dangerously alike. When the doors unlocked, I stepped inside with my purse on my arm and Walter's watch tucked into the side pocket beside my license. The air smelled faintly of printer toner and carpet cleaner. A young teller greeted me with the bright, trained smile people use at banks and churches. Then she looked closer and her expression softened. "Mrs. Carter," she said quietly, "I am so sorry about your husband." I thanked her and asked if Mr. Hanley was in. Tom Hanley had handled our accounts for years. He had seen Brooke in pigtails running her fingers across the coin counter while Walter filled out deposit slips. He knew us before we became a widow, a son-in-law, and a problem to be managed. He came out from his office within a minute, silver-haired, trim, tie perfectly straight, and when he shook my hand he held it just long enough to tell me he understood more than he would say in the middle of a lobby. "Come back with me, Evelyn," he said. His office had the same framed watercolor of a lighthouse it had always had, the same bowl of peppermints on the side table, and the same leather chair Walter once joked made every bad financial decision feel respectable. I sat down and set my purse in my lap. Tom folded his hands and waited. That alone nearly undid me. Not being rushed, not being managed, just being allowed to begin when I was ready. "I need to review everything," I said. "All accounts, all authorizations, every document with my name on it, and every document with my husband's." Tom gave one small nod. "Of course." He turned to his computer and began pulling up our files. The first relief came quickly. Our main checking account was still joint with right of survivorship. The savings account was the same. Brooke's name was nowhere on either one. I had not even realized I had been holding my breath until I let it out. Tom printed the balances and slid them toward me. There was enough there to breathe. Not enough to waste. Not enough to be foolish. But enough that my daughter had not been sheltering a penniless old woman after all. Then came the second discovery. 3 months earlier, Walter had added a note to our file restricting any changes to beneficiary information without in-person confirmation from both account holders or surviving spouse review. He was very clear, Tom said, adjusting his glasses. He said he wanted an extra layer of protection while he was ill. He mentioned he was getting unusual pressure about paperwork. I looked up so fast the chair creaked. Pressure from whom? Tom chose his words carefully. He did not name anyone directly. But he did ask us to document that he was of sound mind and not authorizing third-party access to investment accounts, certificates, or the box. The box. I stared at him. Safety deposit? He nodded. Joint access. You and Walter only. I had almost forgotten about it. Walter called it our rainy day drawer, though it was a steel box in a vault and held more than rainy day things. Old deeds. Insurance policies. Birth certificates. The original trust papers his brother had helped us draft after Walter's first surgery scare. Tom opened a drawer and removed the sign-in ledger. There, in Walter's familiar square handwriting, was his signature from 6 weeks before he died. My throat tightened. Sick as he was, he had come in anyway. He had known enough to prepare for something. There is one more thing, Tom said, and slid a thin envelope across the desk. My name was written on the front in Walter's hand. Not shaky. Not drugged. Steady. Deliberate. Evelyn. That was all. I touched the paper with 2 fingers, suddenly afraid of what certainty might feel like. He left instructions that this be given to you if you came in alone, Tom said. Only you. Outside the office window, I could see customers moving through the lobby with coffee cups and car keys and ordinary Tuesday faces. Inside that room, the world narrowed to one envelope and the terrible, clarifying thought that Brooke had not simply lost patience with me after the funeral. She had moved too early, and Walter, in the last weeks of his life, had seen enough to make sure I would not go down with him. I opened the envelope with the care people usually reserve for old photographs and court papers, the kind that can change your whole life if one line is worded the right way. Inside was a single folded sheet on Walter's cream stationery, the kind he kept in the desk drawer at home, because he said serious things deserved decent paper. His handwriting was steady, almost stubbornly neat, and that hurt more than if it had trembled. It meant he had written it clear-eyed. Evelyn, if you are reading this without me, then I was right to worry. Do not let anyone rush you. Do not sign anything until you have opened the box and spoken to Laura Bennett. Everything you need is there. You are safer than you think. Brooke does not understand as much as she believes she does. I read that last line 3 times. Brooke does not understand as much as she believes she does. It was exactly the way Walter spoke when he was angry enough to become precise. Never loud, never wild, just exact. Tom pretended to review something on his screen while I sat there with the letter in both hands, trying to keep my face from showing how much ground had shifted beneath me in less than 24 hours. Who is Laura Bennett? I asked. Tom turned back toward me. Attorney. Estate and trust work. Your husband met with her twice that I know of. He left her card in the file in case you came in. He slid a business card across the desk. Laura Bennett, Bennett and Shaw, estate planning and probate. A downtown address. A direct line. Walter had not only worried. He had built a path. I would like to access the box, I said. Tom gave a brief nod and stood. The vault was cooler than the rest of the bank, with gray metal doors and narrow aisles that smelled faintly of dust and machine oil. Tom unlocked the outer panel. I used my key from the little ring in my purse, and together we opened the box Walter had called our rainy day drawer. Inside was more than I expected and less than I feared. A thick envelope labeled house. Another labeled insurance. A file folder marked trust. A small velvet pouch with my grandmother's brooch. Our marriage certificate. Walter's military discharge papers. Brooke's birth certificate. And on top, clipped neatly to the trust folder, a yellow note in Walter's handwriting that simply said, "Start here." I almost smiled at that. Even in secrecy, he was still organizing me. I took the folder and carried it with both hands to the private viewing room, where Tom left me alone. The trust papers had been amended 4 months earlier. I was the sole current trustee and sole lifetime beneficiary of the family trust. Upon my death, the remainder would be distributed in stages, not all at once, and only if certain conditions were met. The house Brooke assumed I had left behind forever was not hers to promise, not hers to sell, and certainly not hers to use as leverage against me. It belonged to the trust for my benefit. The investment account Walter's brother helped him build during all those extra consulting years was the same. Brooke had no direct control, no automatic transfer, no quick path around me. I sat back in the chair and felt something inside me settle for the first time since the funeral. Not peace. Not yet. But structure. The kind you can stand on. Then I found the ugliest piece of all. Tucked into the insurance envelope was a photocopy of a form Walter had refused to sign, naming Brooke as an authorized contact for policy changes and document requests. Across the top, in his handwriting, he had written, "Presented by Brooke on Tuesday. Declined. Pressured twice. Keep copy." I stared at the page until the words blurred. It had not started after he died. It had started while he was still alive, still fighting to breathe, still trying to shield me with one hand while managing her with the other. Suddenly the dinner table made sense. The impatience, the polished tone, the certainty. Brooke had expected things to move quickly after the funeral. She must have assumed grief would make me pliable, that a few forms, a few signatures, maybe a temporary stay in her guest room would put enough of my life within reach. Instead, Walter had put locks on doors she had not even found yet. My phone vibrated in my purse, sharp against the hush of the little room. Brooke. I watched her name glow on the screen until it stopped. A second later, another message appeared. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk about next steps." Next steps. I looked down at Walter's note again and felt a cold, clean understanding move through me. My daughter thought she was calling a frightened widow with one suitcase and no plan. She had no idea she was calling the woman her father had prepared. I did not call Brooke back. I put the phone on silent, slid it into my purse, and gathered every paper from the viewing room into neat stacks the way Walter used to do before taxes, closings, or anything else that mattered. Burned off the chill. Cars moved in and out of the drive-thru. A woman in pink scrubs hurried in with a deposit bag. Across the street, a man balanced a cardboard tray of coffees on one hand and shouted into his phone. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before, which felt almost insulting. I sat in my car, laid the folder on the passenger seat, and called Laura Bennett. She answered on the second ring with a voice that was brisk without being hard. When I gave my name, there was the briefest pause. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "I have been hoping you would call before anyone rushed you into decisions." There it was again. Rush. Pressure. Decisions. Walter had left a trail of the same words in different mouths, and all of them pointed in one direction. Laura moved her noon appointment and told me to come downtown at 1. I drove there with the air conditioner on low and the folder buckled in beside me like a quiet witness. Her office was on the 6th floor of an older building with polished brass numbers in the lobby and an elevator that hummed like it was holding on to secrets. Laura Bennett was younger than I expected, maybe early 50s, with dark hair pulled back, low heels, and a navy blazer that looked expensive in the modest, professional way serious women prefer. She shook my hand once, firmly, then closed the door and asked me to start wherever I needed. So I started with dinner. Not the whole story of Brooke's life, not every slight, not every Christmas where I bit my tongue. Just dinner. The sentence, the suitcase, the motel, then the bank, then Walter's note. Laura listened without interrupting, except to ask for dates and to write down names. When I finished, she rested her pen against the legal pad and said, "Your husband anticipated attempted influence. He did a very good job protecting you." I looked down because my eyes burned at that. Even dead, Walter was still trying to make sure the roof stayed over my head. Laura reviewed the trust papers and explained them in plain English. The house I had spent 38 years paying for, painting, cleaning, and filling with ordinary family life was held for my benefit. No one could force me out of it. No one could sell it out from under me. No one could tell me I was lucky to be allowed temporary space in my own future. The investment accounts were similarly structured. Brooke could inherit one day, perhaps, depending on how I chose to leave things, but she had no present authority. None. What about the papers she tried to get Walter to sign? I asked. Laura's expression cooled by half a degree. That depends on what else she has attempted. But from what I see, she was probing for access, not acting from any legal right. Probing. Even her verbs were cleaner than mine. I wanted to call it greed. I wanted to call it betrayal. But lawyers call storms weather until they can prove lightning struck. My phone lit up 3 times while we talked. Brooke. Brooke again. Then Grant. I ignored all of them. Laura noticed and said, "Do not respond until we set terms." Terms. Another word that straightened my spine. Before I left, she gave me a short list written in blue ink. Secure original documents. Retrieve mail. Change passwords. Do not meet alone if conflict is likely. Do not sign anything. Then she looked at me over the rim of her glasses and asked the question no one else had bothered to ask. "Mrs. Carter, where are you staying tonight?" I almost laughed, because there it was at last, the human center of the whole mess. Not assets. Not signatures. Not optics. Just where will an elderly widow sleep? "A motel," I said. "Only for now." Laura nodded once. "Then let us make sure now is very short." I walked out of her office with copies in my bag, a legal plan in my hand, and the first thin outline of something Brooke had not expected me to recover so quickly. Not just security. Authority. By the time I left Laura Bennett's office, the day had sharpened into something I could work with. Grief was still there, heavy as wet wool, but it was no longer the only thing in the room. Now there was sequence. First the house, then the mail, then the locks, then the story Brooke was undoubtedly already telling. I drove to the house Walter and I had owned for nearly 4 decades. The white colonial with the blue shutters he repainted every other summer whether they needed it or not. I had not slept there since the week before the funeral. Brooke had insisted it was too much for me. Too quiet. Too full of memories. She said I needed people around me. What I needed, I realized as I pulled into my own driveway, was not people. It was truth. The maple tree out front had started dropping early leaves onto the brick walk. The hydrangeas were fading at the edges. Walter's wind chimes still hung beside the porch, giving off one thin note in the dry afternoon breeze. For a second I could not move. Then I put the car in park, took my purse, and walked to the front door with the key that had never stopped being mine. Inside, the house smelled closed up but familiar, lemon polish, old books, and the faint cedar from Walter's study. I stood in the foyer and let the quiet settle over me. It did not feel cruel the way Brooke promised it would. It felt honest. My husband's absence was here, yes, but so was everything else he had built around it. The framed vacation photos. The rug we argued over in 1998 and then both loved. The small crack in the hall table Brooke made when she was 11 and tried to roller skate indoors after I told her not to. I set my purse down and went straight to the desk in Walter's study. The top drawer was not quite closed. That alone made me stop. Walter shut drawers all the way. Always. I pulled it open and found the files slightly out of order. Envelopes lifted and replaced carelessly. The old address book turned face down. Not ransacked. Not dramatic. Just touched by someone who did not respect the shape of another person's life. In the trash basket were 2 torn strips from a mailing envelope with the bank logo on them. My pulse slowed instead of speeding up. That was the surprising part. I had moved beyond shock. This was information now. I took out my phone and photographed the drawer, the trash basket, the envelope strips, and the desk exactly as I found them. Then I called a locksmith Laura recommended. He said he could meet me within the hour. While I waited, I checked the mail slot. Empty. That was odd for a Tuesday. I drove 2 blocks to the post office and asked about the old box Walter and I had rented during the renovation years ago, into place with a clean metal sound that felt, to me, like the first honest sentence of the day. That evening I made soup from a can in my own kitchen and ate it standing at the counter, because sitting at the table felt too large for one person and too sacred for careless tears. The house was quiet in a way Brooke had called unbearable, but she had been wrong about that too. Quiet is not always loneliness. Sometimes quiet is evidence that no one is rearranging your life while smiling at you. After I washed the bowl, I carried every document Laura had flagged into Walter's study and spread them across the desk in careful rows. Trust papers to the left. Insurance notices in the center. The rejected authorization form on top. The change of address confirmation beside it. Photographs of the disturbed drawer printed from my phone at the little office store on Maple before it closed. I worked slowly, not because I was confused, but because I wanted the order to become part of me. Every paper was a sentence. Every date was a footprint. Every signature was a door either opened or refused. By 8 o'clock, Brooke had called 6 times. Grant had called twice. Denise had sent one message that simply said, "I am here if you need me." I answered none of them. Silence was doing more for me than explanation ever had. At 8:15, Brooke finally texted something new. "Mom, you are scaring people. Please stop this and come back so we can talk like adults." I read it once and set the phone down. That was her favorite trick since childhood, to cause the fire and then complain about the smoke. I was not coming back to her guest room. I was sitting in my own house under my own roof with legal copies in my purse and fresh locks on every door. If anyone had left the adult table, it was not me. A little after 9, Laura called. Not texted. Called. "I wanted to make sure you are not alone without a plan tonight," she said. I looked around the study at Walter's desk lamp, the framed photo of us at Cape Cod 20 years ago, the legal pad where I had begun writing down every contact Brooke made after dinner. "I am alone," I said, "but I am not without a plan." Laura approved of that in the quiet way competent people do. She told me to document every message, every attempted call, every third party Brooke pulled into the story. She also suggested I choose one relative I trusted and give that person a measured version of events before Brooke's version hardened into family truth. Not the whole file. Not the strategy. Just enough reality to keep me from being painted into a corner. When we hung up, I knew exactly who that person would be. Denise had married Walter's younger brother 32 years ago and never enjoyed foolishness, gossip, or pretty lies. She had the kind of face that looked patient until it was not. I called her at 9:30. She answered on the first ring. "I was hoping it was you," she said. I told her the outline. Not every legal detail. Not Walter's note. But enough. The dinner. The motel. The bank. The forwarded mail attempt. The changed locks. Denise did not interrupt once. When I finished, there was a low whistle on the other end. "I knew Brooke was managing something," she said, "but I did not know it was this ugly." Managing. That was a good word for Brooke. She did not explode. She arranged. "She is telling people I am fragile," I said. "Then let her," Denise replied. "Fragile women do not go to banks, lawyers, locksmiths, and post offices in under 24 hours. I smiled for the first time all day. It surprised me so much I almost laughed. Denise asked what I needed, and I told her the truth. Time. Quiet. And for someone besides me to remember what kind of man Walter was. Her voice softened then. "He was thorough," she said. "And he adored you." I looked at the stack of papers on the desk and felt that truth settle in my chest like something warm. Walter had not left me with chaos. He had left me with instructions. Brooke, meanwhile, was still acting as if volume could outrun evidence. Around 10, another text came through, this time from Grant. "Brooke is upset. She thinks you are making her look bad to the family." I stared at that one a long moment before adding it to my notes. Not because it shocked me, because it clarified everything. Not where are you sleeping? Not do you need medication or clothes or groceries. Not I am sorry for what happened. Just reputation again. Image again. Appearance over substance. I wrote the time beside his message and underlined it once. Then I closed the folder, turned off Walter's desk lamp, and walked through the house checking each new lock before bed. When I finally lay down in my own room, the sheets smelled faintly of starch and cedar. The grief was still there, waiting in the corners. So was the betrayal. But something else had arrived beside them now, something Brooke had not counted on when she watched me leave with one suitcase. Discipline. And with discipline, a woman does not need to shout to become dangerous. The next morning began with church lady sunlight, soft and innocent, the kind that makes lace curtains glow and fools people into thinking truth will arrive gently. It does not. Truth usually comes wearing ordinary shoes and carrying a phone full of messages you never wanted to read. I made coffee in Walter's old percolator because the drip machine Brooke bought me 2 Christmases ago still sat in a box in the pantry, too modern and complicated for a woman she had already decided was fading. While the coffee brewed, I opened my notebook and copied down every call and every text from the past 2 days in careful blue ink. Times. Names. Exact wording. Walter used to say that memory is emotional, but paper is obedient. I understood that now more than ever. At 9:10, Denise called, and told me Brooke had been busy before breakfast. She had already spoken to 2 cousins, one neighbor from church, and Walter's sister Marlene in Florida. According to Brooke, I had become overwhelmed by grief, refused reasonable help, and stormed out after a simple disagreement about plans for the future. Denise repeated the phrase with enough dryness to preserve it for evidence. Plans for the future. That was one way to describe telling your recently widowed mother she had become a burden with an expiration date. Marlene sounded concerned, Denise said. The cousins sounded entertained. Brooke was very polished. Of course she was. Brooke had always done her best work when the audience was at a distance. In person, people might notice the edges. Over the phone, all they heard was concern wrapped in good diction. I thanked Denise and wrote down the names. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling beside me and felt the shape of Brooke's strategy settle into something almost tidy. First remove me physically, then redefine me socially. If she could not control my papers, she would try to control my image. An unstable widow is easier to dismiss than a competent mother with documents. By 11, the campaign widened. Marlene called. So did my cousin Janice in Ohio, who never remembered my birthday, but suddenly had strong opinions about family healing. Both conversations followed the same pattern. Gentle voices, concerned pauses, careful little probes dressed up as kindness. Had I been eating? Was I resting? Did I maybe misunderstand Brooke because emotions were so high right now? I answered every question the same way. Calmly, briefly, without defense. I am safe, I said. I am home. And there are facts Brooke has not shared. Then I stopped. Nothing frustrates a gossip more than a closed door with a brass handle. Around noon, I drove to the grocery store because I needed real food in the house, and because ordinary errands have a way of proving you still belong to the world. I bought soup vegetables, a rotisserie chicken, fresh bread, half and half, and the peppermint tea Walter used to joke smelled like clean grandmothers. At the checkout, Mrs. Fulton from church touched my arm and gave me the kind of sad smile reserved for widows and casseroles. Brooke said you had a hard episode, she murmured. There it was again. I did not even blink. I smiled back and placed my card on the reader. I had a hard dinner, I said. The rest has been productive. Mrs. Fulton looked startled, then curious, which is often one step closer to useful than sympathy. By the time I loaded the groceries into the trunk, Brooke had left 2 voicemails. In the first, she sounded wounded. In the second, irritated. In both, she repeated that she was only trying to help and that people were starting to ask questions. People were starting to ask questions. Good. Let them. Questions are dangerous only to the person who built her shelter out of assumptions. That afternoon, I called Laura and gave her an update on the relatives, the church whispering, and Brooke's change in tone. Laura was not surprised. When direct access fails, she said, some people move. To narrative pressure. Narrative pressure. Even her language made bad behavior sound like a line item. But she was right. Brooke was not reaching for me anymore. She was reaching around me. Do I respond? I asked. Laura thought for half a second. Not emotionally, she said. If needed, respond once, in writing, with facts only. No argument. No explanation. Something that would read well in a courtroom or a family group text. I wrote that down because it was brilliant. Courtroom or family group text. In some families, those were practically the same venue. By late afternoon, I knew Brooke would not stop on her own. She had built too much momentum and mistaken it for control. So I sat at Walter's desk, opened a fresh page in my notebook, and drafted the first statement I would send when the moment was right. Not to everyone. Not yet. Just enough truth to hold the line until I chose where to strike next. Outside, the wind chime gave one clear note against the porch, and I realized with a strange, steady calm that Brooke had spent the day making me sound weak. What she had actually done was gather witnesses. The moment arrived on Thursday afternoon, quiet as a closing door. Denise called to tell me Marlene was organizing a small family gathering on Sunday after church, something informal, just coffee and sandwiches at her daughter Robin's house, while she was in town from Florida. Informal in our family meant 2 things at once. There would be pound cake, folded napkins, and at least one person pretending not to enjoy the tension. Denise also told me Brooke planned to be there. She wants to clear the air, Denise said, and I could hear the skepticism sitting politely behind her voice. Clear the air. That was rich. Brooke had spent 2 days filling it with smoke. I thanked Denise, hung up, and stood at the kitchen counter with one hand resting on the cool granite while the kettle clicked itself off behind me. Sunday would give Brooke what she wanted most, an audience, and what she least expected, a room where I was no longer arriving empty-handed. I called Laura first. She approved my instinct immediately. "Do not ambush," she said. "Do not perform. Answer only what is said, and let documents do the heavy lifting." That suited me just fine. I had no interest in shouting across a coffee table like a woman auditioning for pity. I wanted precision. I spent the next 2 days preparing the way Walter used to prepare for storms, not with panic, but with batteries, flashlights, and everything in its place before the first dark cloud arrived. I made 3 neat folders. One for Laura, if anything shifted legally. One for myself, with originals and notes. And one smaller copy set in a plain blue folder that contained only what any reasonable person would need to see. The rejected authorization form with Walter's note across the top. The forwarding confirmation request with Brooke's address. The trust summary Laura had marked up in plain English. A typed timeline of the dinner, the motel, the bank, the changed locks, the messages afterward. No adjectives. No speeches. Just dates, actions, and proof. Saturday evening Brooke left me a voicemail with a new tone, sugar over steel. "Mom, I hate this distance between us. Aunt Marlene wants everyone together tomorrow, and I really think we should put the drama behind us." Drama. That word again, as if the problem had not been what she said, but my refusal to package it prettily. I saved the voicemail. Sunday morning, I dressed the way I used to for important school meetings when Brooke was young, and I needed teachers to understand I was paying attention. Navy slacks, cream blouse, pearl studs, my silver hair brushed smooth at my shoulders. Light lipstick, glasses polished clean. Grief had hollowed my face a little these past weeks, but it had also carved away any appetite for pretending. When I arrived at Robin's house, cars already lined the curb. Through the front window, I could see bodies shifting in the living room, paper plates balanced on laps, sunlight falling across a table set with cold cuts and fruit. Familiar people, familiar furniture, unfamiliar purpose. Denise opened the door before I even knocked. She took one look at me and gave the smallest nod, the kind women give each other when words would only get in the way. Inside, conversation dipped for half a second and then rose again in that brittle, overbright way families manage discomfort. Marlene air-kissed my cheek. Robin squeezed my hand. A cousin I had not seen since Easter looked at me with such eager concern I nearly smiled. Brooke stood near. The fireplace in a pale blue sweater, one hand wrapped around a coffee cup, the other resting lightly on Grant's arm. She looked exactly like the version of herself she wanted witnesses to remember. Composed, patient, dutiful, wronged by a difficult mother. "Mom," she said softly, stepping toward me as if we were 2 inches from reconciliation instead of a mile from truth. "I am so glad you came." I looked at her face, at the careful sympathy arranged there, and felt something cold and steady settle inside me. Not rage. Rage would have helped her. This was better. This was balance. "So am I," I said. We all sat in the living room after a while, paper plates on knees, cups on coasters, everyone pretending the sandwiches were the reason we were there. Brooke began first, of course. She spoke with just enough tremble to suggest pain, not enough to look theatrical. She said the last few weeks had been hard on everyone. She said grief had caused misunderstandings. She said she loved me and had only tried to discuss practical next steps because she was worried about my future. Then she glanced down, shook her head faintly, and added, "I never imagined my concern would be turned into something so hurtful." Several people shifted in their seats. Marlene made a small sound in her throat. Grant stared into his coffee like it might open and swallow him. I let the silence stretch one beat longer than comfortable. Then I set my plate down, took the blue folder from my handbag, and placed it on my lap. "You are right about one thing, Brooke," I said. "This is about practical next steps." Every eye in the room turned toward me. Brooke's smile held for 1 second too long. Then I opened the folder. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Rooms like that do their own amplification when the truth lands cleanly. I opened the blue folder on my lap and removed the first page, the photocopy of the authorization form Walter had refused to sign. "Since we are discussing concern," I said, looking not at Brooke but at the room, "let us be specific about what kind." I held up the paper just enough for the people nearest me to see Walter's handwriting across the top. Presented by Brooke on Tuesday. Declined. Pressured twice. Keep copy. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was recognition. Brooke's face did something small and quick, like a curtain twitching before someone remembered the window was open. That is out of context, she said immediately. Dad was sick. He was confused about paperwork all the time. I turned my head then and looked at her fully. No, I said. He was precise. There is a difference. Marlene leaned forward and held out her hand without speaking. I passed her the page. She read the note, then read it again more slowly. Her mouth thinned. Denise did not ask for the paper. She was watching Brooke. That was wiser, like a man realizing the map in his hand had been upside down the whole trip. You told me none of that was settled, he said quietly. Brooke turned on him with a look sharp enough to make lesser people retreat. Because it was not settled emotionally, Grant. That was the point. Denise let out one dry breath that was almost a laugh, and not kind. Marlene set the first page down with the care of someone handling evidence instead of family. Brooke, she said, did you tell your mother to leave your house? Brooke lifted her chin. I told her she needed a plan. Everyone here knows she cannot just drift forever. That is not what I asked, Marlene replied. It was the first time all afternoon anyone had spoken to Brooke as if she were not the stage manager of the event. Brooke opened her mouth, closed it, then tried a different tactic. Her eyes brightened. Her voice softened. I was under pressure too. Dad had just died. The boys were upset. Mom was shutting down. I was doing everything. There it was, the pivot from denial to martyrdom. A classic move. Useful only when the room is still willing to believe your suffering excuses your behavior. This room was no longer that kind of room. You were doing everything, I said, except speaking to me with respect. No one moved. No one reached for a sandwich. Even the air conditioner sounded embarrassed. I did not mention the motel. I did not need to. I did not repeat the sentence from dinner. I did not have to drag the whole ugly thing across the carpet for everyone to inspect. The documents had already done what anger never could. They had turned my private humiliation into her public pattern. Brooke could feel it now. You could see it in the way she gripped her coffee cup too tightly and then set it down before it rattled. I was trying to protect this family, she said. From what? Denise asked. No one had ever loved Denise more than in that exact second. Brooke looked around the room for rescue and found only faces recalculating. Robin looked appalled. Marlene looked tired in the deep, ancient way older sisters do when a younger generation confirms their worst suspicions. Grant looked like a man replaying several recent conversations in painful new light. And me, I looked exactly the way I felt. Still, certain, finished with being handled. I think, I said, lifting the folder and closing it with a soft snap, that what my daughter misjudged was not my grief. It was my paperwork. And now that we are all properly informed, no one needs to guess what really happened again.